Well, good morning and welcome to Daily Focus. We're glad that you have joined us again this morning. We certainly have a responsibility to be praying for the folks in Midland and those surrounding areas. I'm always reminded that God is in control, but these situations are sometimes hard to explain, and we certainly may never know the reason why God allows things like this, but few things are more damaging than water. And for those of you that haven't heard, I think it's 2 or 3 dams have collapsed in the Midland area, causing the river to just go wherever it wants. Reminds us that boundaries are a good thing. And when things get out of those boundaries, destruction happens. And that really goes along with Proverbs, as Proverbs has been teaching us, really for us to enjoy a prosperous and productive and proper life. We need to stay on the path of wisdom, and we need to build high boundaries on both sides, high fences to keep making sure that we're on target and making sure that we don't step off the path and start going down a path of destruction. And so when we think of waters and staying inside of their boundaries, everything works fine. In fact, that water can be channeled and it can be used for good to create power and many other wonderful things. But when it gets outside of those boundaries, just destruction happens. And so we need to be praying for Calvary Baptist Church and Calvary Christian School and a number of other very good ministries and obviously wonderful people around that area. But if you think about it, pray for them, ask God to protect them and care for them, give them wisdom as they deal with this tragedy. Well, we've been talking about Proverbs chapter 6, and we talked about not becoming responsible for someone who's irresponsible, and then not being irresponsible for that which we are responsible. And so we're going to actually switch gears again in this chapter, and God's going to point out the woes of a naughty person. And really, he's going to say, you need to beware of naughty people. And you say, well, how do I know if someone is naughty? Well, there's a lot of things that Bible talks about that are clearly out of bounds and would make a person a wicked person. And we don't like to think of people that way, but really when people do not follow the path of wisdom, God calls it wickedness in his sight. And so a naughty person is really embracing that which God calls wicked. And so we're going to look at what God describes as that naughty person, starting in verse number 12. A naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward mouth. He winketh with his eyes, he speaketh with his feet, he teacheth with his fingers. Frowardness is in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. And the next verse is really an important verse, and we've talked about all of the familiar verses, some of the more familiar verses like Proverbs 3, 5, 6, and 7. But yea, 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 is an abomination unto him. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. But in these verses 12 through 15, God warns us about a naughty person. He says, you beware of people who, and then he talks about people who non-verbally sow discord. And then he warns us about the fact that they don't stop there. They actually sow discord verbally. So this person is always about stirring the pot. This is the person who is always about putting someone down. This is always somebody who's causing a rift. They're trying to get people at odds with each other. They're constantly causing question about authority. And these are the people that God says to beware of. And so he reminds us that you have to be careful to be able to notice and recognize when a person is off the path of wisdom and they're charting down the path of destruction, because they're going to want to take you with them. He talks about the fact that these people literally all the time are devising a way to create or stir up trouble. They are constantly, when you talk to them, they're pitting people against people. They're constantly putting down authority. They're putting down someone else. And they may do it even in a deceptive way. And so God says there in verse number 12 that they walk with a froward mouth. In other words, the things that come out of their mouth are critical, complaining, they're things that are combative. And then he says, but they also wink with their eyes, they speak with their feet. In other words, watch what they're really doing, or the fact that even they hand motion. And all of those things are communications in order to create problems. And then he says, frowardness is in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually. Well, when we stop and we think about this, is really not all that unusual. And the devil warned us about how this works right off the bat. And so what happens with a naughty person, if you really want to know what a naughty person looks like or what they sound like, they always start with leading questions. In other words, do you think the boss really knows what he's doing? Do you think the pastor really cares? Do you think, and they fill in the blank, right? Do you think this president should be on hydroxychloroquine? I mean, do you really think so? I mean, these are questions. They're leading questions. They're meant to begin the conversation, to direct it in a way where it's destructive. And well, you know, the devil started that way in Genesis chapter 3. Hey, hath God said, are you really going to die? These are leading questions, and they're designed to stir the pot and get the conversation degenerating to a place of destruction. And so the question is what you have to learn to identify from a naughty person. And then the next thing is then they begin to insinuate. The devil clearly said, you will not die. The Lord knows that in the day that you eat, you will be like God. You will know good and evil. Now, there is an element of truth, and there usually is an element of truth in those who are insinuating something in order to further draw the net, draw you in to their destructive powers, their destructive conversation, their destructive perspectives, usually of some type of authority. And it is designed to undermine their credibility. We see it all the time with the news media. We see it all the time in the battle in politics. And where did we just lose as Americans the decency to show respect to someone who is a leader? To just respect them as another human being. Where we may not agree, but where did we become the person who is supposed to undermine every decision they make, everything they do, and stir the pot of people that will undermine their credibility and their opportunity to direct people, to lead as their authority dictates? You know, we can disagree. And when things violate Scripture, when they get out of bounds, we ought to be able to stand up and say something. But even when we stand up and say something, it must be founded upon truth. And the devil insinuated things about God that just were not true. He had no basis to say the fact that they would not die after God said that they would. And so when we come back to this identification of a naughty person, you just pay attention to the questions they're asking. And then listen to what they're insinuating. And then listen for the insults. And they're usually a personal attack on the way someone has treated them, what they've done or haven't done, or whatever the case may be. And you now will know a naughty person. Now, the hard part is verse number 15, because it says, therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken and without remedy. In other words, God will step in one day. It's sad. We sometimes see it in this life, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we see it quickly, and sometimes God is patient. But for a naughty person, God will deal with them. And he will deal with them, and they're not going to be able to stop it. And when punishment comes, unfortunately for the fool, they just blame someone else. They just justify, and they continue down their naughty path, even though God is trying to help them and get their attention. Most of the time for a naughty person, the lesson isn't learned until ultimate destruction comes. God says to us, beware of a naughty person. Satan was the example in Genesis chapter 3, but we have a responsibility to stay on the path of wisdom and don't let a naughty person get you off track. May God bless you today. We'll look at the rest of this text and the rest of this chapter tomorrow. I hope that you have a great day. Remember to pray for the good folks in Midland. Pray for one another, and be faithful today